Today, the situation on the front line of the Ukrainian-Russian war is difficult. The armed forces of Ukraine have recaptured part of the territory in the Pokrovsk sector, near the village of Novohradivka. It is noted that it is here that the Russian military suffers enormous losses of personnel. Ukrainian hospitals in the enemy-occupied territories are overcrowded with wounded Russian soldiers. An agent of the movement from the 30th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade reported catastrophic losses of the aggressor in the Pokrovsk sector. Russian brigades suffer terrible losses every day, up to 50 people wounded and killed in one brigade in just one day. Hospitals and clinics are overcrowded with occupants. Civilians are being urgently discharged to make room for wounded occupation soldiers. This information was confirmed by an agent from among the medical staff of one of the hospitals in the temporarily occupied Makiivka. According to him, the occupation authorities continue to ignore the needs of civilians in order to save their soldiers. Ukrainians are being kicked out of hospitals to hospitalize Russian soldiers, the statement reads. It is also known that it is in this area that the occupiers form the largest groups of troops, armored vehicles, and artillery systems. As noted, the occupiers are trying to break through to Pokrovsk, which is 10 kilometers away. At the same time, the Ukrainian military is also reinforcing its positions throughout the controlled territory to deter the enemy's aggression and prevent it from advancing further. Many Russian soldiers are being taken prisoner. According to a captured Russian, they are simply driven forward as cannon fodder, followed by punitive units responsible for ensuring that the Russian military constantly advance along the front line, and if a soldier or a group of soldiers refuses to advance, they are immediately killed by their own punitive units. In addition, lately, the Russians have not been taking Ukrainian soldiers prisoner at all. This was an order given by the Russian military leadership. Instead, Russian soldiers voluntarily surrender, and then they are held in decent conditions. The Russian occupiers live in clean conditions, have 3 meals a day, can relax in the fresh air for 1 hour a day, and even watch TV, while Russia keeps Ukrainian soldiers in terrible conditions, torturing them with hunger, psychologically and physically abusing them. Also, after the strike on the oil depot in Feodosia, Russian troops in the occupied Crimea faced significant problems with fuel. Agents of the Atesh military guerrilla movement have been recording active movements of mobile gas stations, which are forced to constantly change their location. According to the guerrillas, the fuel crisis on the peninsula is getting worse. They have recorded active movements of military fuel trucks, which are trying to compensate for the lack of fuel for the Russian armed forces. According to Atesh, the Russian military command has ordered that fuel storage points stay in one place for no more than 10 to 12 hours, which makes it difficult to supply military units. Our agents continue to monitor the routes and transmit the coordinates of the fuel stations to the Ukrainian Defense Forces, Atesh said. This situation shows that the destruction of facilities of this magnitude has a critical impact on both the supply of troops and the performance of combat missions by the Russian armed forces. In the Zaporizhzhia sector, Russian troops are launching active offensives. Today, the Ukrainian military successfully repelled one enemy attack near Robotyno. However, according to Ukraine's military intelligence, Russian troops are increasingly amassing manpower near Robotyno, and an offensive may be expected in the near future. But according to military experts, the activation of Russian troops observed in the area of Robotyno and Staromayorsk may also indicate an attempt to play up some kind of activation in order to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from pulling troops from these areas to more active front lines. Or it may be that some kind of reconnaissance is actually being conducted by combat, the so-called probing of Ukrainian defense. Roman Svitan, a military expert, pilot instructor and colonel of the armed forces of Ukraine in reserve, noted that the Zaporizhzhia direction is a difficult area for the occupiers. They have a huge logistical arm there, 500 kilometers long from Taman or Rostov. As Roman Svitan emphasized, it is unlikely that the occupiers will now be tasked with carrying out major offensives in this area. It is more likely to be counterattacks and attacks to improve the tactical situation. For example, the Ukrainian Defense Forces launched a much larger counterattack in the Kursk region in the past. The Russian invaders intended to deploy troops near Sudzha to strike at the Sumy region. All this led to Ukraine's entry into the Kursk region. Also about the Kursk region, the Russians tried to push back Ukrainian positions, but the armed forces of Ukraine are holding the lines. Russia has deployed about 50,000 troops to the Kursk region, weakening positions on other front lines in Ukraine, where the Russians were conducting offensive operations, said Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky. He clarified that such actions of the enemy led to the weakening of its groups, in particular in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, and in the Kramatorsk direction. This, of course, has made it easier for us to conduct a defense operation, Syrsky added. The Ukrainian project Deep State reports that the Russian army has pushed through the left flank of the Kursk group of the defense forces. According to analysts, the enemy has recently pulled together a large amount of equipment and manpower and is now trying to gain a foothold in the area of Novohradivka and Zeleny Shliak. An extremely unreliable tactical situation has formed for neighboring units to the north. The Ukrainian project Deep State also reports that Russians shot 9 Ukrainian soldiers in the Kursk region. According to sources in the 1st Separate Tank Brigade, it happened on October 10th near the village of Zeleny Shliak. The Ukrainian soldiers went to their positions thinking that they were in the relative rear, but they had a limited number of weapons and were forced to surrender, after which they were executed. In total, the losses of the Russian invaders amounted to 1,300 people over the past day. Ukrainian soldiers also neutralized 9 tanks, 49 armored combat vehicles, 29 artillery systems, 1 MLRS, 2 air defense systems, 45 tactical UAVs, 71 vehicles, and a unit of special equipment of the occupiers. Thank you, friends. That's all for today. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest developments. This video was prepared by Hustler. See you soon.